Sage was never considered simple by the ancient world. For them, sage was not simply an aroma, not simply a seasoning, and not merely a kitchen herb. Sage was a presence, a silent force living among stones, among the wind, among homes. A plant to be respected, to be asked, never to be taken lightly. The name itself seems to tell the story of this ancient idea. The word sage comes from the Latin word salvia, connected to the verb salvare, meaning to be well, to be healthy, to be saved. And that alone tells us a great deal. For centuries, sage has been associated with health, protection, and the ability to preserve what is precious. Sage was not seen only as a plant that could help the body. Sage was considered a plant capable of protecting the home, the mind, and the family. A plant that seemed to possess a strength of its own. A quiet strength, but a constant one. And perhaps that is exactly what makes sage so special. Sage does not have the spectacular colors of a flower. Sage does not grow by trying to attract attention. The leaves are green, almost silver, covered with a fine layer of soft hairs. The plant looks humble. And yet, when you touch it, when you break a leaf and breathe in its fragrance, everything changes. The aroma is intense, resinous, almost wild. The scent of warm stones, dry earth, and the Mediterranean. And perhaps part of its character comes precisely from this environment. Sage knows the sun, drought, and wind. Sage does not need much to survive. And this ability to endure probably helped make sage, in the imagination of the ancient world, a symbol of strength and longevity. Even in the Roman world, aromatic plants were not simply part of the kitchen. They were part of medicine, rituals, everyday life, and religion. And sage held a special place. According to some ancient traditions, sage had to be treated with respect when it was gathered. The person collecting it might approach the plant in silence, almost as though the act involved more than simply gathering an herb. The act could feel like coming into contact with something sacred. In some ritual descriptions, offerings were made to the earth before the plant was gathered. The important thing was not only what was taken. Asking for permission was important too. This idea appears again and again throughout the history of medicinal plants. A plant was not considered a simple raw material. The plant belonged to nature, and humans could use it only by respecting where it came from. Sage was a plant that was asked for, not simply taken. And perhaps this sentence perfectly summarizes the way ancient people looked at nature. Nature was not seen as a warehouse filled with things to use. Nature was seen as a living world, a world with which people needed to maintain a balance. The fragrance of sage also played an important role. Smoke from aromatic herbs was used in different ritual settings throughout the ancient world. Burning a plant meant transforming it. The leaf became smoke. The smoke rose toward the sky. And something that belonged to the earth suddenly seemed able to reach the world of the gods. For this reason, aromatic herbs became associated with purification, prayer, and protection. And sage, with its intense fragrance, was perfectly suited to this imagery. The smoke seemed to have the power to change the atmosphere of a room, to make the room feel different, cleaner, quieter, more peaceful. Ancient accounts do not always allow us to clearly separate medicine from superstition, but this overlap is precisely what makes the history of sage so fascinating. For ancient people, body and spirit were not two completely separate worlds. Health meant balance, and balance could be disturbed by illness, but also by fear, anxiety, or the feeling that something was not right. And so a plant could become medicine, symbol, and protection all at the same time. This idea did not disappear with the end of the Roman world. Quite the opposite. During the Middle Ages, sage became even more important. In European monasteries, where monks preserved and passed down much of the botanical knowledge of the time, medicinal herbs were cultivated with great care. Sage was among the most valued plants. Sage was used in traditional preparations and cultivated in monastery gardens. And many proverbs and beliefs grew around it. One of the most famous said, "Whoever has sage in the garden will never die." Naturally, this was not a promise of immortality. The saying was a symbolic way of expressing the enormous respect people had for this plant. Having sage near the home meant having access to a plant considered precious. a plant connected with health, a plant that, in the mindset of the time, could accompany people through their most difficult moments. And so sage also entered the domestic world. Sage became a presence in gardens, in vegetable plots, and inside homes. According to various folk traditions, sage was also used to protect living spaces. Aromatic herbs were burned to perfume and purify the air. Small branches were kept near doors. Certain plants were kept inside homes as symbols of protection. And once again, the same idea returns. Sage was not only used to treat something that had already happened. Sage was also used to prevent, to protect, to keep away what could not be seen. And perhaps this is exactly why sage became associated with wisdom. Because protection also means knowing how to recognize danger, knowing when to stop, knowing when to listen. In weddings, within some European traditions, sage also became a symbol of longevity and wisdom. A simple branch could become a blessing, not simply a wish to live a long life. A wish to live a long life with a clear mind, with balance, and with strength. And in medieval monasteries, sage was so important that the plant often appears in descriptions of medicinal gardens. Sage was practical, resilient, and valuable. A plant capable of growing even in difficult conditions. And this resilience made sage even more fascinating. The journey of sage across Europe was slow, but continuous. Sage originated in the Mediterranean regions, where the plant grew in sunny and dry environments. From there, through trade, cultivation, and especially through monasteries, sage gradually spread farther north. Monks played an important role in preserving and spreading many plant species. They cultivated plants brought from distant regions, studied them, recorded their uses, and passed their knowledge down through generations. And so sage slowly left the Mediterranean. Sage crossed the Alps. Sage entered the gardens of Central Europe. Sage reached England. And the plant became so highly valued that it also acquired significant economic importance. Some stories claim that the European sage trade reached surprising levels, and that in the East, sage was considered an extremely valuable commodity. Some merchants were said to have exchanged it for very large quantities of tea. Beyond the numbers, which are also part of tradition and may have been exaggerated over time, the meaning remains fascinating. A Mediterranean plant could travel thousands of kilometers. And sage did not travel only as a commodity. Sage traveled with a reputation. The reputation of a precious plant. A plant associated with health, protection, and wisdom. Then, with European expansion, sage also reached the Americas. But an important distinction needs to be made here. When people today talk about sage in purification rituals, the image that often comes to mind is white sage, a species different from Mediterranean common sage, known as Salvia officinalis. White sage belongs to the traditions of certain indigenous peoples of North America, where specific plants were used in ritual and ceremonial practices. The meaning of these rituals is profound and belongs to specific cultures. White sage is not simply an American version of ancient European traditions. And yet, one element is surprisingly common: the idea of smoke as transformation, as a passage, as an act capable of marking a before and an after. First, there is a space. Then smoke moves through it. And afterward, at least symbolically, something has changed. This is one of the oldest ideas humans have associated with aromatic plants. Fragrance changes the air. And when the air changes, the way we perceive a space can seem to change as well. Perhaps this is why, even today, when we smell sage, something inside us recognizes it. Not necessarily because we remember an ancient story, but because its aroma is immediately connected to something familiar. A kitchen, a garden, a home, the earth, the sun. Sage has remained. Sage has crossed centuries, empires, monasteries, and continents. The meaning has changed. Sage has been medicine, seasoning, symbol, fragrance, and ritual plant. But one characteristic seems to have accompanied sage throughout its entire history: presence. Today, we look at sage and see a simple plant with green and silver leaves, velvety leaves, an intense fragrance, an herb that can grow in a pot on a balcony or in a small garden. But when we stop for a moment and look at it, a much greater story exists behind that leaf. There is the Mediterranean. There are Roman homes. There are monastery gardens. There are folk traditions. There are generations of men and women who looked at this plant and thought of health, protection, and wisdom. And perhaps that is exactly why sage still creates such a particular feeling today. Sage does not need to be spectacular. Sage does not need bright colors. Sage does not need to grow quickly. Sage is discreet, resilient, silent, a plant that seems to say that strength does not always make a sound. Sometimes strength grows slowly, among the stones, under the sun, in the wind, and simply continues to live. Sage is not just a plant. Sage is a reminder of the ancient relationship between humanity and nature. Sage is a symbol of a simple kind of wisdom, the kind that teaches us to observe before taking, to respect before using, to understand before judging. And perhaps, after thousands of years, the message remains the same. A simple message, almost whispered: breathe, stop, listen. And remember that sometimes even a small leaf can carry a story far greater than we imagine. Sage is not merely an herb. Sage is a gesture of protection, a symbol of wisdom, a silent presence, an ancient way of saying, breathe, you are safe.